Now, it's a candidate forum for those running for the job of the United States Senate, the seat now held by Democratic Senator Chuck Robb. We will hear from former National Security aide Oliver North, who announced his candidacy for the Republican nomination last week, and Jim Miller, former director of the Office of Management and Budget in the Reagan administration. We will hear first from former Virginia Lieutenant Governor candidate Mike Farris. The forum is hosted by the organization called First Thursday, runs about 90 minutes.
I want to thank you all for the chance to be here this morning and to speak to you briefly. Mainly, I want to come by and just say thank you so much for all that you did for me last year. We worked together hard for principles that we believe in. Sometimes you lose the battle, but I don't believe we've lost the war. And I am still active not only in litigating for constitutional rights for families, but also in standing up for the rights of Virginians to have good, sound government. Virginia has done something unbelievable, and that is introduce a resolution to ratify the ERA, even though it's been dead for over 15 years. Some of the feminists have convinced a few legislators that time limits stated in the ERA don't count, and they can ratify it any point in time that they like. I've written a legal memo that's being circulated among Republican legislators, but we've got to watch this. Some of the arguments that were raised by the ERA back when it was originally proposed seemed like fantasy land. Things like homosexual marriages, gays in the military, and so on. Back when we argued those issues in the 1970s, people thought we were dreaming. Those bad dreams are upon us now, and people need to stand up for family rights in all levels of government, and I believe that we've got a special focus in 1994 in Virginia upon the federal offices. We need to have people elected. Kyle McSlera, we need to elect one of these fine Senate candidates, so we will have someone who stands up for the rights of the family, for family values, for the rights of the unborn in an unquestioning manner. And we need to have a government that is full of the kind of values that our founding fathers stood upon. We're starting a project called the Madison Project to help elect people to office that stand for the principles of the founding fathers, traditional family values, common sense, the life of the unborn, the Second Amendment, and other kinds of solid conservative values. If we do that, we will have a bright future in this Commonwealth. Thank you for the opportunity to come by. Good luck and God bless.
Thank you very much, Mike. I thought you all would enjoy hearing from him. I'd like to now begin to introduce our panel members, kind of give you an idea of who they are and where they're coming from. Once I'm finished with that introduction, I'll turn it over to the moderator, and I'll let him take it from there. The first panel member is Bill Olson. Bill Olson is an attorney who's been in private practice in the D.C. metropolitan area for 17 years. His firm's principal office is located in McLean, Virginia. Olson has served several positions in the Reagan administration, including as chairman of the board of directors of the Legal Services Corporation and as a member of the President's Export Council's Subcommittee on Export Administration. Mr. Olson is a former chairman of the Fairfax County Republican Committee, and he has attended First Thursday for many, many years. Neil F. Markva is a longtime resident and activist in Fairfax County. He is an attorney in Springfield who has written and published a series of 26 broadsides entitled Our Christian Heritage. He is presently involved in litigation related to Fairfax County's proposed indebtedness for purchasing buildings B2 and B3 in the controversial county government complex, which I'm sure many of you have read about in the papers. Markva is the state coordinator for the Christian Committees of Correspondence in Virginia, Maryland, and the District of Columbia, and he is also a long and faithful First Thursday attendee. The Reverend Ron Bossum is the third panelist. He is the minister at Harvester Presbyterian Church in Springfield. Harvester Presbyterian is a congregation in the Presbyterian Church in America. Reverend Bossum is a graduate of Reformed Theological Seminary in Jackson, Mississippi. He has pastored at Harvester Church for the last 18 years Reverend Bostom has been actively involved in planting over 25 churches in the Virginia and Maryland area. And finally, our moderator this morning is the Honorable Guy Farley. Guy Farley is the founder of First Thursday, and he has served 3 terms in the Virginia General Assembly. He has represented Virginia on the Platform Committee at the 1980 Republican National Convention. He served as well as chairman of Citizens for Reagan-Bush in Virginia in 1980, and he is a former Fauquier County Republican Committee chairman, and he ran successfully, many of you will, unsuccessfully, I beg your pardon, as I'm sure many of you will remember, he ran for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia in 1981. Mr. Farley is currently an attorney and businessman whose work is centered in Warrenton, Virginia. And at this point, I'd like to turn the podium over to Guy Farley, let him make the introductions of the candidates and to lay out for you the rules of the candidate forum. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We want to try to move this along as quickly as possible. I think it might be appropriate to briefly outline the rules of the forum, and this is a forum, not a debate. First, each candidate will have 3 minutes for an opening statement and 2 minutes for a closing statement. The questions will be posed only by the panelists. I, along with Wayne Mullins, will try to strictly control the limited time. We won't stop you in the middle of a sentence, but if a period doesn't soon come, there are too many commas, we might. The candidates will have 2 minutes to respond to each question. Since this is not a debate, there will be no time allowed for rebuttal. The purpose of the forum is to allow a candidate to present his own views, not to explore what he perceives to be the weaknesses of his opponent. If a candidate does not answer a question to the satisfaction of the panel, any panelist may ask a follow-up question. The candidate will have 1 minute to respond to these follow-up questions. I've already flipped a coin. The North campaign won the toss, and they have elected to do the first opening and the final closing. So each candidate will have an opportunity at the conclusion to make a statement as well. The questions will cover at least 5 areas, and I'm certain the questions that you've presented through the audience to the panel will cover more than these 5 areas. But the initial questions will cover life, the Second Amendment, taxes and economics, official English, homeschooling, education. As I say, the other issues will be covered through your other questions. Time permitting, the audience will have the opportunity to ask questions through the panelists, and those questions have already been forwarded. I realize that George said the time is up for submitting them, but if you do have others, you might try to pass them up in the event they can get to all of them. It's my pleasure now to introduce the 2 candidates for the Republican nomination for the U.S. Senate, and I would ask, as they're introduced, if they would to come up and take a seat on the podium. In alphabetical order, the first candidate, Jim Miller, is a longtime veteran of national politics. He spent the last 20 years in government, academic, and business positions. He was senior staff economist in the Nixon and Ford administrations. He served on President Reagan's cabinet as budget director and on the Reagan National Security Council. He steadfastly refused to support tax increases, and he worked to reduce spending, or the growth of spending. From 1981 to 85, he headed up the Federal Trade Commission. As head of the Trade Commission, he reduced a lot of red tape that adversely affected the business community, and he reduced the staff of that agency by 1/3. Since 1988, Jim Miller has been chairman of Citizens for a Sound Economy. He fought against the Clinton BTU tax, and he's also fighting now against Hillary Clinton's health care system. Jim was born in Georgia in 1942. He graduated from the University of of Georgia and received his doctorate from the University of Virginia in economics. Jim and Mrs. Miller have 3 children, and they reside in McLean and attend McLean Presbyterian Church. Let's give a First Thursday welcome to Jim Miller. I didn't know you were down there. You okay there? The second candidate is Oliver North. Upon graduation from the Naval Academy, he was commissioned in the U.S. Marines and assigned as a platoon commander in Vietnam. His decorations include the Silver Star, the Bronze Star with a V for Valor, 2 Purple Hearts, and 3 Navy Commendation Medals. After serving with distinction in a number of other assignments, he was ordered to the White House for duty with the National Security Council and was later named Deputy Director of Political and Military Affairs at the White House. He played a major planning role in the liberation of Grenada and the capture of the hijackers of the cruise ship, the Achille Laura. Later, he helped plan the raid on Omar Gaddafi's terrorist camps in Libya. As a result, he was targeted for assassination by the terrorists. He became well known for the controversy surrounding the role he played in carrying out President Reagan's policy of support for the Nicaraguan resistance and his involvement in the rescue of American hostages in Lebanon. And I might say, if I may digress, and please hear me out on this because I am a moderator, but today he is targeted not only by the Libyan terrorists, but by character assassination terrorists in the country he defended. Liberals in the Washington establishment, the national media, and the arrogant and self-righteous in his own party. At first glance, if you are a Miller supporter, you may think this vicious attack helps your candidate. It's not so. If this race becomes the establishment versus Oliver North, Jim Miller's message, and he has one to tell, may never be heard. They could care less about Jim Miller. Their goal is to protect Chuck Robb and to keep anybody out of the Senate who will stand up to him. This country desperately needs a leader This country desperately needs a leader with the courage to stand up. We hope this meeting will help you decide who this leader might be. Maybe it's one of the 2 men who are here today. They're both good, decent men, and I think we can all agree on that. And part of this process is to select the one that can best represent the Republican Party in the U.S. Senate race. Forgive me for digressing. I'll finish Oliver North's bio. He was co-founder of Guardian Technologies International, a Virginia-based manufacturer of protective equipment for law enforcement. He also founded the Freedom Alliance, a nonprofit foundation dedicated to promoting individual liberty, a strong defense, and traditional values. He's written 2 books, Under Fire and One More Mission. Colonel North and Mrs. North and their 4 children reside in Clark County. Let's give him a First Thursday welcome as well.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate this warm welcome back to First Thursday. I am grateful for the chance to talk to you about this campaign. If I may just go a little bit beyond Guy's description, I would have introduced myself simply as the husband of 1 and the father of 4, as a person who is today a successful business person who knows how difficult it is to leap the hurdles of government regulations and create a good product and good jobs. Most importantly, I stand before you as living proof of the power of prayer. I know well that they are answered. If anyone needed evidence, and he'd only look at me. I would also tell you that my best friend Betsy is at home getting our youngsters off to school, and she regrets that she cannot be with you this morning. But I would also point out to you that this campaign is not about the conflicts within the Republican Party. This campaign is about whether or not this nation is going to start a new generation of leadership. It is about whether or not the pervasive role of the federal government will be rolled back, and about whether or not we're going to allow our children to have the future that they are supposed to have in this constitutional republic. It is a campaign about whether or not the people of Virginia are comfortable with the inside the Beltway crowd. It is a message that needs to be carried across the length and breadth of the Old Dominion. I have done so for the last 4 years, campaigning hard for other Republicans who want to go and change things. We managed to end one-party rule in Richmond this year, and my campaign is based on the premise that we need to do things at the federal level that will support the reforms and repairs that George Allen has started at the state level. I stand before you as a person who is unabashedly pro-life, and I will vote that way. I stand before you as a person who knows that we're paying too many taxes, and I will fight against them and never vote to raise them. I stand before you as a person who believes deeply in term limits and am committed to seeing to it that we have it in America as the first step in trying to get control of the government back in the hands of the people. I stand before you today as a person who believes deeply, having been blessed with the opportunity to educate our children in public, parochial, religious, private, and homeschooling, that every American deserves to have that choice, and we need to do things at the federal level to ensure that every family can do so. And I stand before you today as a person who has issued a challenge to our party that we ought not to engage in mud wrestling. This is not an issue as to whether or not Jim or I can mud wrestle better. It is an issue as to whether or not we can lead better. And I would submit to you that that's what we have got to be about in this campaign. Those who would distribute literature, like I have seen on the chairs here today, defaming the character of one person or attacking another, ought not to participate in that process. And that's been my challenge in this campaign and in every other campaign I've been engaged in, and I will not participate in mud wrestling in this campaign. Thank you, sir.
I want to start by thanking the officials of First Thursday for holding this debate, and I want to thank the moderator and the panelists, and I have just one request for the panelists, and that is be easy on me, will you? No, I'm just kidding. Actually, I hope you will be tough on both of us. Why? Because I think it's imperative that these people here and those people on TV find out where these two candidates stand on the issues. I have challenged Colonel North to a debate, to 11 debates, one in each of the congressional districts, and he has refused. This may be the closest thing we have to a debate in this race for the nomination, so I hope you will make the most of it. Now, what is it that you look for when you look for a candidate for public office? What is it that you look for? First, you look for someone who has beliefs that generally in accord with your own and who truly believes in those views. You can judge for yourself where my views are and how closely they approximate your own in response to questions this morning. Secondly, you look for someone who would be effective as a legislator. I have had experience in the Reagan administration. I have a record of achievement. I have a record of being able to figure out what the problems are, identify solutions, and get them implemented over and over and over. Thirdly, you look for someone who has integrity, someone you can trust. As Governor Godwin says, the best way to judge how a person will perform in office is look at how they performed before they took office. Predictability. And fourthly, you look for someone who can get elected because, ladies and gentlemen, we need to displace Chuck Robb in the United States Senate. Chuck Robb is out of step with Virginia. Fortunately, the silver lining is he's not so effective. But he's out of step with Virginia. We need to have a good conservative who is effective in the United States Senate. Who can be elected? Who can beat Chuck Robb? The latest evidence we have of that is a poll published 2 days ago, the Mason-Dixon poll, the independent Mason-Dixon poll. And what did it say? It showed that Ollie North loses badly to Chuck Robb. I lose by a narrower margin to Chuck Robb, and the undecideds are much greater in the case of the two of us. Let me quote you from the poll results. Robb's vulnerability is underscored by the fact he only leads Jim Miller, the other declared Republican candidate, by a 42% to 27% margin. Unlike North, Miller has stronger potential to attract the significant majority of undecided voters. Robb's margin over Miller is based almost exclusively on his 40-point name recognition advantage. In other words, if my name recognition were 100%, and after this it's going to be, I would be tied with Chuck Robb. Is that 3 minutes? I'm sorry. Well, I'll leave it at there. Thank you very much.
To begin the questions, Mr. North, in a nation that receives between 2 and 4 million legal and illegal immigrants a year, the first question is of some great significance. Many politicians say they believe and support making English the official language of the United States, but I think you'd agree with me that politicians very often use words to mean things that are different than what the public uses those same words to mean. So let me just clarify and say that for the purpose of this question, that official English means that the government would conduct its affairs in the English language and would encourage people to learn English rather than to promote a permanent multicultural society. Virginians think it's foolish that the Department of Justice requires down in the Richmond area the ballots to be printed in the language of Chickahominy. Especially, they thought it was especially foolish when they found out that there was no written language of Chickahominy. But overwhelmingly, the Americans believe that the English language is what unites us and that the federal government should not discourage people from being absorbed into the mainstream of society. So I'd like to ask you is, do you support making English the one official language of government? And if elected, would you introduce or co-sponsor legislation which would repeal mandatory federal bilingual requirements and mandatory federal multilingual voting requirements?
The answer to both questions is yes, because I believe that English is the great melting pot of this nation. I say that as the son or grandson of an immigrant who, at the turn of this century, came to this country. And though he spoke the mother tongue of the country he came from, the same which we speak here, I well recognize that the effort to create hyphenated Americans, which is something rampant in this land, is not beneficial to the idea that all Americans are the same. I would go one step further, however. I would go back to the Department of Education budget, which this year has nearly $750 million allocated to teach youngsters algebra and American history and other skills in our high schools in other languages, and I would zero that out from the budget.
Thank you. I think we're going to follow the pattern of repeating the question just for clarity. Mr. Miller, do you support making English the one official language of government, and if elected, would you introduce or co-sponsor legislation which would repeal mandatory federal bilingual education and mandatory federal multilingual voting requirements?
I support English as the official language of the United States. I think our schools should be teaching English, not encouraging children to learn an alternative language as their language. They can learn that language at home. I think it is extremely important that America be a diverse nation. And that word diversity or diversity is an excellent example of how the liberal steals good words and puts it to their own uses. But I think the fact that we are a melting pot, as Colonel North mentioned, is a very important one. and I think we ought to preserve different heritage and different cultures. But I think that in terms of schooling, in terms of official language, it ought to be English. And I would support that, and I would eliminate federal programs that are contrary to that principle.
Mr. Miller and Mr. North, we got together as a panel ahead of time, and we discussed the questions that we felt the electorate in Virginia would be interested in knowing the answers to. And it's been reassuring to see that the cards that have come in from those who are in the room sort of fit the various questions that we're asking you today, so that I have any number of questions on the issue that I've been asked to consider having you to ponder, and that's the whole issue of abortion. Now, there's been a lot of rhetoric about abortion. It's certainly an emotional issue. There are a lot of avenues that you can go into whenever considering giving an answer. But I have a very specific question, and I'll start with you, Mr. North. And I'd like you to think through specifically what I'm asking, and then answer in such a way that you're showing us what your position at this particular point, what convictions your position would lead you to. Okay? Have you ever come to a final decision as to whether a fetus is a baby from conception, with inalienable rights granted by the Creator, which must be protected by government from harm? By this, I mean opposing all abortion with the sole exception of protecting the life of the mother.
I have. That's the answer to your question. You said, have I come to a conclusion? The answer is yes, I have.
Conclusion, what will you do if elected as a senator to try to promote this truth?
Yeah, I will vote pro-life, and this is not something I've come to recently. It has been widely reported, and I suppose recorded by the reporters who camped out at my front gate for 7 straight months every single day. They saw the pro-life bumper sticker that was on my car way back in the 1980s, all those millennia ago. I have traveled all over America campaigning hard for pro-life candidates. I have worked hard to provide alternatives to women so that they would not seek abortions. I've raised significant sums for abortion counseling centers that offer crisis pregnancy treatment to mothers who otherwise might opt for an abortion, and to give them alternatives like adoption. And I will vote pro-life as a U.S. Senator.
Question. Have you ever come to a final decision as to whether
Yes,
a fetus...
I can waive that. I can answer it. And I also want to take a little time. I thought the questions would alternate. Is Mr. North going to get the first question every time? Is that the way it's going to work?
No.
It'll change? Okay.
We'll alternate.
Okay,
Matter of
fine.
fact, I was supposed to start with you.
Okay. Let me say, my position on it is very clear. I believe life begins at conception and ends at natural death. And that's the position I hold. And it's for that reason that I oppose abortion, except when the life of the mother is at stake. And I don't make any exceptions for it. Now, I hope that you will follow up with Mr. North, because his staff is handing out literature that has an exception in it. And
Can we stop at that?
Yeah.
Only because I don't want to see this. We want to hear where you would stand. And the other thing we would like to hear at this point is, as a senator, what would you do?
As a senator of the United States, I would vote against all efforts by the federal government to promote abortion. I would vote against the Freedom of Choice Act, any other kinds of legislation that would restrain the ability of states to place Casey-type restraints or conditions on abortion, such as parental notification. I would work to reduce the frequency of unwanted conceptions. I would work to make it easier for a mother to carry a child to term. I would make it easier for couples to adopt children, such as my wife Damaris and I adopted our first child. That's very important, and it's a personal thing with me.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Miller, as we know, the Second Amendment is designed to protect the people from the government. Late last year, with the help of a few Republican liberals, President Clinton pushed the major new anti-gun Brady bill through the Congress. What core convictions do you have for preserving our right to keep and bear arms? And what would you commit to support or oppose if elected? For example, do you favor a federal ban on any currently legal ammunition, magazine, or firearms such as semi-automatic weapons?
I think the Second Amendment is very clear, the people to have a right to bear arms, and I think it's a very important protection against tyranny, and I would preserve that as United States Senator. I would vote against efforts to restrain the ability of people to have and bear arms. Let me tell you why. Because the focus on gun control is deflecting people's attention from the real underlying causes of crime. And those and roughly speaking, are insufficient deterrent, but also tragically, a set of values that are where the notions of right and wrong, what is moral and immoral, is lacking. We have a whole generation, significant portion of our population growing up without knowing right and wrong. How can another gun law solve the crime problem when we're not able to teach our kids that murder is bad, murder is wrong?
Thank you very much.
Could I just, if I have the time, let me just say on the question of assault, so-called assault rifles, that's another place where the liberals play a trick on us. What they're talking about is semi-automatic guns. What they would like you to believe, it's automatic rifles, and those have been banned since 1934. And I would like to know my opponent's position specifically on that, because he said it two ways.
May I ask you to specifically address what I asked? What is your position with regard to semi-automatic weapons?
Okay. My position,
yes.
Oh, yes, okay. I'm against this Feinstein bill. I think it again, not only deflects people's attention away from the real underlying causes of crime, but it's setting up another step on the way to banning weapons of the sort that people have a right to bear.
Fine. Thank you very much.
What?
Mr. North.
Yes,
May I repeat the question
Please.
for you? What convictions do you hold with respect to the preservation of our right to keep and bear arms? And what would you commit to or oppose with respect to this if elected? And do you favor a federal ban on any currently legal ammunition, magazine, or firearms such as semi-automatic weapons?
the answer to your second question is no. I do not favor extending the federal mandates, laws, regulations, restrictions on the Second Amendment any further than they already are. I think, quite frankly, they've gone too far already. A full disclosure here, I'm a life member of the NRA, so I want you to understand where I'm coming from. I believe that the Second Amendment protections that we enjoy in this country are as important as the First and the Third and the Fifth and the Ninth, all of them. The fact of the matter is that our constitutional protections are slowly being eroded by that permanent political aristocracy across the river. And they're simply attacking one after the other each one of those rights that we constitutionally hold as individual citizens in this country. Second of all, we all know, as Jim just pointed out, it is a false canard to have the issue of guns raised as a means of controlling crime. There is not a single indicator anywhere in the country where gun control affects crime. The way to control crime is to control criminals. What we have to do at the federal level is to support measures like George Allen advocated, the reforms and repairs he's making in Richmond. We need to be able to do that at the federal level. On the issue of an assault weapon,
If someone wants a real assault weapon, that's a fully automatic military assault weapon, let them join the Marines. They'll give them one. They won't even have to buy it.
But that does not include the semi-automatic,
No,
is
it
that
does
right?
not. We're talking the federal regulations that exist today are more than enough. We don't need to be dickering with the Second Amendment further than it already has been dickered with.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Miller, I guess if we ask you a question, this will even it up.
Right.
Conservatives look back on the Reagan administration, I think, with enormous pride and satisfaction of what President Reagan accomplished during that time. But for many, there's at least this tarnish on that memory with respect to the critical issue of the level of our national debt, where the national debt when President Reagan came in was $907 billion and almost tripled to $2.6 trillion during those 8 years. And your service during the last 3 years, I believe it was, at OMB was overseeing that national debt. And so I think it wouldn't be unfair to say that your major claim to fame in the Reagan administration might be in an area of the Reagan administration's greatest weakness. And if so, I don't know if you might agree with that, but President Reagan never presented Congress with a balanced budget. He was never therefore able to say, it's not our fault, it's your fault. And now we had a situation where President Clinton has been blaming President Reagan for budget deficits rather than the situation where the liberal Congress could share that blame. The budgets President Reagan never proposed were never balanced. Do you think that was a mistake in retrospect?
Oh, absolutely not. Let me tell you, number one, the deficits before I arrived, and I'm responsible for 3 fiscal years, 87, 88, and 89. The deficits the 3 previous years were $185 billion, $212 billion, $221 billion. My first year, the deficit fell a record $71 billion, the largest reduction in the deficit in the history of the country. And it didn't happen because we raised taxes. We didn't raise taxes. What did we do? We controlled spending. Federal spending adjusted for inflation was lower my first year than it had been the year before. First time that had happened in 20 years. I don't take responsibility for those budgets before I got there, but I take responsibility for the budgets while I was there. My 3 deficits were the lowest 3 deficits in the past 10 years. I have a record about which I am proud. And I'll tell you this, ladies and gentlemen, the deficit would have gone further down. The spending would have been more under control if the last 2 years we weren't constantly fighting with Congress over you know what. And that was a substantial deterrent to our ability to perform. Let me say, finally, if you start with a $221 billion deficit, it would not be appropriate to balance it the next year. The reason to eliminate it to zero the next year. The reason being, what you would have to do in terms of raising taxes, in terms of cutting spending that would not be politically acceptable, would be so grave as to disrupt the economy and cause tragedy. My budget, each one of them, had the deficit going down, and if my budget had been adopted and had been followed, the budget would be balanced today. Thank you.
Let me follow up and say that I'm not sure comparing by saying that your years were the lowest deficit years in the last 10 years is much accomplishment, comparing it to the rather reckless spending patterns in the Bush and Clinton administrations. But I do think that at some point we have to argue from principle. At some point we have to base our convictions on principle, or else we're going to constantly lose these battles with people who would take more of our money and spend it on good programs. If you don't argue from principle, what do you have left? Is a $171 billion deficit a victory?
Oh, absolutely not. I think we ought to bring the deficit down dramatically. My 3 deficits were 150, 155, and 152. And again, they would have been a lot more lower, and we would have come much closer to balancing the budget if we were not fighting the last 2 years over you know what. Since I can't refrain from being critical of my opponent, I'll just say you know what. We did the best we could. And in fact, last 2 years, the Reagan administration, as you know, we fought a holding action against those in Congress that would reverse the Reagan administration. And that's one reason I'm running, is to bring back what Ronald Reagan tried to do and effectuated in Congress and beat what Bill Clinton's doing to try to undo the Reagan revolution.
There were many, let me ask a final follow-up. There were many in the Reagan administration that did not want the president to veto spending bills, appropriations bills, saying that that would use up his political capital on unimportant matters. What side did you take in that argument?
You go back and look at all the records, I wish I had a nickel for every veto threat I sent to Congress. And in fact, because I threatened veto so often, people on Hill began to call me Dr. No. And in fact, some of them call me the Abominable No Man. And that is the subtitle of my new book coming out by the Hoover Institution. I was on the side, Bill, of the angels.
Okay. Mr. North, a slightly different question on the same topic. Most of your experience has been as a Marine officer in national defense, foreign policy, and as a small businessman. And with the problem the national debt is for our country, can you tell us what you bring in terms of your background, your experience, and your views to help battle this fight?
I think the best answer to that, Bill, is to say that I bring common sense, practical experience, and the ability to talk in terms that the average American can understand. You know, if we listen to the permanent political potentates of pork up there on Capitol Hill, they will tell you that reducing the rate of growth of the deficit is a good deal. If Slim Fast tried to advertise that you would only gain 10 pounds instead of 20 by taking Slim Fast, they wouldn't sell any of it. And the reason for that is that the American people are a lot sharper than the inside the Beltway crowd. And my concern is that what we've got going on, Mr. Clinton gave a State of the Union address just 9 days ago, talked in those very same terms that he'd reduce the deficit. Every single American out there knows that we are spending more money this year than we're taking in. I could not run my small business that way. There's not a single person in this room that could run their homes that way. We would go broke because we can't print money. The fact of the matter is that Ross Perot, God bless him, raised the issue of debt to political visibility in the last campaign, and it was devastating. It was devastating because we don't have the right answers for it. What's the right answer? Term limits for members of Congress who will not take re-election pork back home. That's why I'm committed to 2 terms and then gone. Totally committed to it. A balanced budget amendment has got to be passed, and we've got to give a president, regardless of what party he's in, a line item veto. And I am going to go to the United States Senate, not just to talk about these things, but to fight for them. And there's one thing everybody here knows, is I know how to fight. Thank you.
To the extent that we need to fight based on principle as opposed to based on just the numbers and whether something is going to be somebody once said if you're headed over a cliff at 60 miles an hour or 40 miles an hour, it doesn't make much difference. Absolutely. How do we deal with the problem now? What would you do as a senator when faced with a $200 billion unbalanced budget?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Just yesterday, there was a vote taken in the United States Senate, and that vote was to eliminate foreign military assistance and security assistance to countries that don't vote with us at least, get this, 25% of the time. Okay? I mean, just think about it. 25% of the time in the UN. It would have reduced out of the budget tens of millions of dollars because most of the countries that we're giving this foreign military assistance and security assistance to vote against us about 80% of the time in the UN. That vote failed. Now, I will tell you, in Virginia, we have 2 senators that voted 2 different ways on it. I would have voted with the Republicans on that Trent Lott bill to eliminate that funding and save some money. See, the way to balance that budget is to start zeroing out that fat. That's why we have to go back to every department and agency in the federal government and insist that they have to do the same kind of zero-based budgeting reviews that we had to do in the Pentagon. It was a gut-wrenching process. The fact of the matter is every department and agency of the federal government has to be able to do it. That will not happen until we get term limits. We have got to get it and get it soon.
Mr. North, in the last presidential election, Rush Limbaugh did his very best to convince America that character was an important issue in selecting our nation's leaders. And from the cards that are in front of me, I think that many within this room are very concerned about the attacks on your character, especially the attacks that have come in the last few weeks. You haven't been given the opportunity without being under some form of persecution to express your rebuttal to some of the things that have been said. Now, if the only ones making charges against you were people like Ted Koppel, no response would be necessary. But last June, Reader's Digest commissioned one of its senior editors to write the story, Does Oliver North Tell the Truth? The article detailed not one, but many instances where other Reagan aides cited discrepancies between your statements and the documented events. And I'd like to just give you the opportunity to respond to the type of charges that were made in this particular article.
Well, as a person who's been attacked for everything from a gap in his front teeth to having jug ears and almost every other aspect of my life, let me just say, first of all, I don't believe that there's anything to be gained by going back and accusing other people of being duplicitous or not telling the truth. Quite frankly, the most important thing to remember on that is that two different people could easily have two different recollections of events, and neither one of them be telling an untruth. That's an important thing to remember, because we all remember things differently. Second of all, if we're going to measure integrity, then we ought to look at whether or not a person keeps their word, and whether or not a person stands up for what they believe in. Well, I kept my word to the Nicaraguan resistance because I was the one who had to carry it. I kept my word to the hostage families because I was the one who had to go to Beirut and Cyprus and Tehran. And I did so at the risk of my family at a point in time when I had been publicly threatened by the world's most brutal terrorist, Abu Nidal. I kept my word to my president. I've kept my word to my family. I've kept my word to the Corps of Marines that I served with the motto Semper Fidelis for 22 years. Those who would attack my character ought to also remember I've kept my word to the Republican Party of Virginia. Last year I made a pledge to our party that I would not raise money for my campaign until after the gubernatorial election had been held. I not only kept my word, I went out and I raised and spent and gave away nearly $750,000 to our candidates all across. When all the doggone political elites were telling me you can't run for the Senate by not raising money in 1993, I keep my word. I think that's indisputable to anybody who's looked at the real record. Thank you.
Mr. Miller, it's often observed today that the only people who can be discriminated against are the conservative Christians. Some even feel that these religious people shouldn't even hold office. Let me read to you a quotation from the Richmond Times-Dispatch, Wednesday, November the 3rd, 1993. It says, former White House Budget Chief James C. Miller III, who's all but announced for the Senate, wasted little time last night arguing that homeschooling advocate Michael P. Ferris' defeat for lieutenant governor was proof positive that the GOP should avoid nominating candidates with high negatives. Now, public figures are often misquoted, and they're mischaracterized in the press, and I think there are a number of people in this room that would agree with that.
I will.
And good. And I want to give you the chance to straighten this out. I understand that some of the reporters from the Dispatch are here, but would you respond to whether or not this is an accurate quote? If it is, then would you explain your thinking behind this statement?
First, that was a piece, I believe, by Jeff Shapiro, and it was based on a conversation we had in a very loud hall because there was a lot of jubilation with George Allen and Jim Gilmore's winning that evening. Secondly, what I said that he may have written that might have been edited down was that what the election shows is that when you have something like this shameless campaign by Don Beyer to a campaign of religious bigotry against Mike Ferris, it's hard for somebody to be elected. That's what I said. That's what I meant. That may not have been communicated to people. The second point I want to make is I campaigned for Mike Ferris. I campaigned for Mike Ferris a lot more than my opponent over here. And everywhere I went, I defended Mike Farris. And I defended him on television, I defended him on radio, I defended him in person, and I said to people, your characterization of Mike Farris reveals to me that you don't know Mike Farris, because Mike Farris is a person of integrity. Let me respond also on the question of I am a conservative. I'll take them in the order you gave me. I am a conservative. I'm a Reagan conservative. And I am a Christian.
Very good.
And I am seeking this office. And I think I have every right to seek this office. Finally, let me say one other thing. If you elect me, you're a United States Senator, I won't make commitments to people where to carry out the commitment would violate federal law.
Mr. Miller, some would say that public education has been a principal contributor into what Dr. D. James Kennedy refers to as the sliming of America. My question is, should parents have the primary authority to make educational decisions for their children? If so, what would you do to return educational responsibility to parents? More specifically, for example, should the government, under any circumstances, be able to prevent parents from homeschooling their children if that is their choice?
Let me say, just as in the case of a balanced budget amendment and a line item veto and more recently term limits, I have written about these things. I am on record. I am an analyst who has investigated and done research on these issues, and one of those issues is school choice. I am in favor of school choice. I was in favor of school choice as budget director. As budget director, I covered an enormous array of issues, and school choice was one that I hammered home. My organization has published pieces. I have published pieces in favor of school choice. I want to make a distinction between public financing of lower education and public provision or private provision of lower education. For one thing, if you do that, if you have vouchers or tax credit, one of the things that can happen is that schools can then begin to teach morals and ethics and principles. And parents would be empowered to send their kids to schools that parochial Catholic schools, parochial Jewish schools, Christian schools, non-affiliated schools that would teach ethics and principles and morals and right and wrong. And that's one reason, that's one of the two reasons that I am so much in favor. And I would say this as well. If parents want to teach their kids at home under the sort of restrictions that they do it today, those parents should get the vouchers and should receive the income from those vouchers.
Just a slightly different preface. Article 1, Section 8 of the Federal Constitution provides no authority whatsoever for Congress to legislate in the area of education. Now, the same question that I have here in view of that, should parents have the primary authority then to make educational decisions for their children? And if so, what would you do to return that responsibility to parents, and specifically speak to the question of choice with regard to homeschooling?
Sure. As a person, as I indicated in my opening remarks, as a person who's educated their children in public schools, private schools, religious schools, and homeschooled, I believe that right today, it's easy for the affluent in this country to make those kinds of decisions. We can make those kinds of choices. One of the reasons I went out and supported Prop 174 in California was because that would have opened up that choice to all people. It ought not to just be the rich who get to make those kinds of choices. And we can do things at the federal level in terms of tax vouchers to give parents that kind of opportunity. Folks criticize me for saying that by saying, well, what would you do about homeschoolers? I can itemize for you, and Mike Farris can itemize for you exactly what it costs us to educate our youngsters at home, because there are real costs, and if we had a provision in federal tax code that allowed that to be deducted, it would help all kinds of parents to make those kinds of choices.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Miller, Mr. North has already commented on his position on term limits. Would you quickly comment on your position?
Yes, let me just make a clarification. I would grant a tax, the equivalent of a tax credit, not a tax deduction for homeschooling, there is a difference there. On term limits, I have written about term limits, published on term limits in the Wall Street Journal. I did analysis which found, not surprisingly, that the longer members of Congress are in office, guess what? The bigger spenders they become. And for that reason alone, if term limits would reduce the propensity of members of Congress to engage in this excessive spending. But it also changed the incentives. If members of Congress weren't forever running for re-election by taxing someone else and bringing home the bacon to their districts or to their states, there wouldn't be this enormous pressure for the government to expand and get further in our pocketbooks at every turn. And so I'm in favor of term limits. I'm in favor of 2 terms for a United States Senator and 6 terms for a member of the United States Congress. Okay. And I will work to achieve that. And let me tell you, the chances of our getting that are much greater than you might believe, because there's activity in almost every state. It's very high voter approval, and because when you get approximately 50% of the members of each house in the Congress with facing term limits, they'll then vote to apply it to everybody else.
I've got a rather homemade question here to ask both of the candidates. Who answered first last time? Anybody remember?
I've forgotten.
All right, well, let's start with you then. Will each of you pledge here today to openly and actively support the nominee of the party for the office that you are now seeking?
Yes.
I told Ollie in June that if he wins it fair and square, I'll support him. He'd surely be a better senator than Chuck Robb.
A follow-up on that, if he wins it fairly and squarely, if he gets the nomination, are you saying he might not win it fairly and squarely, or what does fairly and squarely mean?
The words speak for themselves.
So you'll be the judge of that?
Oh, I fully anticipate. Well, for one thing, if you sign up, and if you will sign up as a delegate to go to the convention for Jim Miller, and if you do so, you will see at the bottom, I fully intend to support the nominee of my party, and I do that.
So we have both of you gentlemen's pledge here today that you'll support each other.
Absolutely.
Is that correct?
You have mine.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
I said yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Before we leave that, you should know that we have a number of recommendations here that one of the 2 of you withdraw right now and support the other right now, and then 2 years from now run against one of the current senators that... I'll leave it at that.
No.
Ollie, you want to? Yeah. I was first, by the way. I announced first.
On that one.
I announced first.
There's a homeschooling question. Somebody.
I guess we'll give this one to Mr. Miller. Just wanted to get in at least one question on national defense today, even though this wasn't the focus of the debate. The President's new Secretary of Defense designate is talking about additional cuts. The question becomes, is this still a dangerous world that we live in? Is the Soviet menace behind us forever? And can we continue to pare the defense budget beyond where it is at the present?
I think we're in substantial danger because of what the Washington crowd oxymoronically calls the bill down. And by the way, when Bill Clinton went on national television and said he wouldn't reduce defense anymore, he's playing trick on you.
That's right.
Because what he meant was he wouldn't reduce defense any more than has been patterned in the 1992 budget deal, which already savages defense. We are in a dangerous situation. We have places aflame all over the world, Somalia. We have places aflame in Bosnia. We have potentials in other places. We have a nut with a nuclear bomb in North Korea. We have a crazy guy, Zhirinovsky, in Russia, who wants to take back Alaska, who wants to take Germany. And for us to be cranking down our defense preparedness now is insane, and we've got to reverse it. Moreover, I tell you something. We as Americans do not have people in leadership posts in the foreign policy and defense establishment in this Clinton administration who have anything like the stature and experience needed to do the job. There is no George Shultz in that cabinet, no Jim Baker, no Cap Weinberger, no Dick Cheney, no Frank Carlucci, no Al Haig. And this is very disturbing to all of us and ought to give us all pause. And when Bill Clinton proposed to engage in social experimentation with the military, he ought to have his head examined.
Could I ask you if your last question referred to gays in the military, and if so, what's your position on that?
My position on gays in the military is that it's wrong. Let me just make sure that people understand. I think gay lifestyle is wrong. My religious training tells me it is wrong. But I'm not a gay basher. Gay lifestyle, again, is not my lifestyle, but I'm not a gay basher. What I think is very important here is that you've had hundreds of thousands of people sign up to serve in the United States military and make it a career with one set of rules that are very important to them about social interaction and about assumptions. And Bill Clinton wants to change the rules of the game, and that's wrong.
Mr. North, in your area of strength, let's ask you what how you perceive the Clinton defense budget and policies.
Well, what President Clinton suggested last Tuesday night was that he wouldn't cut defense any lower than the level it's already at. It is already at a lower portion of our federal budget than it's been at since before Pearl Harbor. That would be fine if we lived in a new world order. We do not. We live in a new world disorder. The North Korean government is rattling what may well be a nuclear-tipped saber. We are forcing our allies to make concessions to despots, which creates vulnerabilities for this nation. The concessions that Mr. Clinton made on Team Spirit, a vital exercise in Korea, the concessions that he's forcing the Israelis to make to deal with Syria, are the consequence of us reducing our defense capabilities beyond the point where we can meet our commitments. Unfortunately, there do not seem to be enough people in the Congress of the United States with experience in the field of arms, the profession that has protected this nation for 2 centuries, and my deep and abiding concern is that the administration, with the consent of one-party rule in Washington, is about to turn the military into a radical social experiment. They need to be told 2 things: that the young men and women of our armed forces are not there to provide the credibility for the United Nations. The credibility of the UN isn't worth 1 drop of American blood. That the young men and women of our armed forces are not laboratory rats in some radical social experiment. What Mr. Clinton has got to understand is that they are there to protect this nation's vital interests. They cannot be committed to the kinds of willy-nilly commitments around the world like he has already done and some that he has forecast without the backing of the American people and without giving them the means to win, the resources and the ability to win a victory. I am a veteran of the only war America ever lost. It should never, ever happen again.
Let me just offer you the same follow-up about gays in the military and see if you still disagree with Senator Robb on that.
Well, Senator Robb has been one of those people who's endorsed Mr. Clinton's plan to radicalize and to treat the young men and women of our armed forces as those laboratory rats. They're not. And I would do everything in my power as a member of the United States Senate to reverse what Mr. Clinton has started, to get things back on track and to stop this profusion of lawsuits that has begun as a consequence of his new policy.
Mr. Miller, do you have a priority issue that you plan to work on as a senator? And by that, I mean, as you look at the United States of America, is there a particular problem that you want to focus on?
Let me say, as a United States Senator, I would have 2 agendas. One, the longer-term agenda would be reforming the set of incentives that members of Congress have that cause them to perform poorly. I'm talking about balanced budget amendment, term limits, a line item veto, other reforms that we could go into detail about, just very technical, that would make Congress more responsive, more accountable, more responsible in its behavior. The shorter term is that I think we've got the number one thing, because it's forced on the agenda already, is the Clinton health package. It's got to be beat. It's 180 degrees out of phase. We don't have a problem with health care financing in the country because we have too little government. We have a problem because we have too much government and the wrong kind of government. And I would change the standards. I think it is immoral to force people for whom, like me, abortion is wrong to pay for somebody else's abortion on demand. That is wrong. And that health care plan includes that sort of thing. I would change that. I think, by the way, the strategy ought to be just to beat it. Just to beat the proposal, not to compromise. We compromise on that proposal, we get socialized medicine, if not this year, then next. And so we have to beat it. And I think the chances are pretty good, because the polls are certainly moving in our direction, and more questions are being raised about this massive intrusion and infusion of governmental control.
Mr. North, same question. Is there a major problem in America that you, as a United States Senator, would focus on during your term?
The major problem is one of the growth and the extraordinary profusion of intrusion of the federal government in our lives. My effort would be to reduce that by term limits, the balanced budget amendment, line item veto, zero-based budgeting, and getting government off the backs of the American people. I deeply believe that what we've got to be about is creating a whole new generation of leaders who want to go off to serve in public office for a while, but not a lifetime. We've got to find people who are more concerned with the next generation than they are about the next election. And that's why you have my commitment to 2 terms. We've got to find people who really understand that the heart of America, the heartbeat of this nation, cannot be heard from the back seat of a limousine riding up and down Washington's avenues. We've got to understand that the real American problems out there are the consequence of having too little left after a hard day's labor, and they earn an honest wage, and there's less there because the federal government was there first. We've got to get government off the backs of the American people, the families of this nation, and allow our children to have the kinds of opportunities that we're supposed to have in this country.
Mr. North, like education, Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution does not give the federal government any authority to be involved in the question of legislation in the area of crime. However, we have a huge crime bill before the Senate, and if it were to pass as is, what proposal would you make to preserve the rights of the states to handle crime within their own jurisdiction?
Great question. I deal with, in my small business, with law enforcement all across America. I like to remind people I have the only business in the world where you love to see your parking lot full of police cruisers because they buy the high-quality armor products that we make in Sterling. My concern is that what Mr. Clinton wants to do is to create a federal jurisdiction in every neighborhood of America. We do not need 100,000 federal cops in America. What we need is community policing. We don't need policemen who will sit there filling out a report, and I talk to cops who do this all the time, filling out a report on a violent criminal that they have apprehended, and while they're still filling out the paperwork, they're watching him walk out the door to perpetrate another crime against a woman or a child or some innocent in this country. What we've got to be about is supporting the kinds of initiatives that George Allen has started in Richmond from the federal level, not intruding on it, mandating it, dictating it, but supporting it. And I'll give you one example that Mr. Clinton just killed. There was money in the original Republican version coming out of the United States Senate to provide for regional prisons, and Mr. Clinton had it killed. Now that's the kind of idea that we need to have more of, and it would be directly supportive of local community and state law enforcement.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, same question. I'd like to know how you would direct your efforts to restore this right to the state?
Well, I think it's important for the federal government to stay out of micromanaging law enforcement at the state and local level. The federal government can be a catalyst to bring certain things about. Certainly the local levels need more deterrence, need more no-nonsense judges, need more resources given over. But it also can do this better if the federal government quits putting so many mandates on states and local governments when it offloads the cost of doing things to someone else. If we freed up the federal government, the state governments from all these mandates, they would have more resources to spend on law enforcement. That's one reason that I'm in favor of what's called a regulatory budget that would force Congress to tote up all of these costs and to budget them every year, and hopefully there we could get them down. That would make a lot of difference in state law enforcement, and I think improve our reduce crime at the local level.
Thank you.
Jim, given the present day existing human rights violations in China, do you favor most favored nation status for China?
Well, my inclination is not to favor it. What you might do is to make some kind of cold, hard calculation with these people, that if you gave them most favored nation treatment, they might improve. If you could bargain with them, that they would improve their human rights record, it might be worthwhile. My wife and I, Damaris, stood in front of the Statue of Freedom at 10 o'clock on Thursday morning before the Tiananmen massacre on Saturday evening. And my heart goes out to people. We got pictures with people in Tiananmen Square, many of whom may be dead today because of the savagery of those Marxists in China. I don't want to deal with people like that, but if we can improve the status and the freedom of people in China somewhat by giving them a bit of a benefit, I think we need to make that cold, hard calculation, but I'd have to have that proven to me today. You know, it's very difficult to deal with these people. The Marxists just have a different newspeak. They're not honest with you. For example, in North Vietnam, I do not believe that we should be dealing with those people until there's a full accounting of the prisoners of war in North Vietnam.
Back to the China question. If you had to cast a vote today, how would you vote?
I would have to examine the legislation very, very closely, but I'd have to be proven to me that it made sense. I'd be inclined against it.
But, okay.
I'd vote dead no. It seems to me that it's irrational for this country to talk about promoting democracy and expect concessions from communists when all we do is make concessions to them. History will teach us that every time we do it, whether it's North Korea or the government of Vietnam or the government of the People's Republic of China, that we will get it stuck to us. There has never been a successful conclusion of a concession to a communist government that's resulted in them doing what they've promised to do. And as I wrote in my last best-selling book, if I could plug that this morning, I just returned from Vietnam last spring, went out there and visited. I would have voted against the measure that came up in the U.S. Senate this week that Chuck Robb voted in favor of. That is the normalization of relations with Vietnam. And I would vote against most favored nation status with China until they have improved their human wrongs record.
I want to point out that we've been asking the questions that have been coming in on the cards. And one of the questions I think is extremely important because it was the conservatives, Republicans in Congress who joined with President Clinton to pass NAFTA. Now, there are going to be a number of things that are going to be coming up again with regard to NAFTA, and we would like to hear your position on that issue. Do you favor NAFTA?
Yes, and somehow or another it was reported in a conservative publication that I had come out against it. I wrote an op-ed piece, maybe they didn't read my op-ed piece, that came out in support of NAFTA because in my small business, I pay an import duty if I ship into Canada. I pay an import duty if I ship into Mexico. And NAFTA is going to be good for my workers and good for my business. And it's going to be good for business in general in Virginia. And so I came out very strongly in favor of it. But as usual, the folks in the big media got it wrong. I believe it's good for workers in America. And that's the reason I took that perspective.
I want to make sure that you have a chance to respond to this, because there are some of us who believe that the NAFTA proposal was unconstitutional because it puts agencies of the United States under the control of international agencies. And I would like to have you speak to that for a moment.
Yeah, unfortunately, the Clinton administration attached a lot of sidebars to the original NAFTA agreement, which, as you know, did not have those original restrictions in it. I would be in favor of lifting those requirements. The idea of fair trade, and I emphasize the word fair trade, is important to business in America, but most importantly, it's important to jobs in America. Fair trade is good for the workers of this country. A worker deserves the chance to make an honest day's wage for an honest day's work, and there will be more work with NAFTA. Unfortunately, some of those sidebar agreements need to be looked at again. And as you know, there is a provision to have them looked at again, and while I'm in the U.S. Senate, we will look very closely at them again.
Thank you very much. Mr. Miller, I'd like to have you respond to the same question, if you would.
I support NAFTA. I supported NAFTA when it was negotiated. I support NAFTA when it was passed. I support NAFTA now. Why? 3 reasons. Number one, my analysis showed that 9,000 jobs in Virginia would be at risk if NAFTA did not pass. Secondly, the political reforms that Carlos Salinas has brought about Mexico would be in jeopardy if NAFTA did not pass. Thirdly, NAFTA is the key to a general agreement on tariffs and trade, the GATT Accord, and the GATT Accord will liberate American agriculture and realize Virginia's agricultural comparative advantage and generate many more jobs in Virginia. Had we not had NAFTA, we wouldn't have GATT. Now, are either of those treaties perfect? No. Both have some problems. I do not understand that the side conditions for NAFTA are unconstitutional because the accord has various agencies making recommendations to the Congress and to the President, not having direct control. If it is unconstitutional, the court will find it unconstitutional, and that provision will be overturned. But I am in favor of NAFTA. I have always been in favor of NAFTA. I published an op-ed in the Richmond Times-Dispatch in favor of NAFTA on the first 2 of those reasons just before NAFTA was voted on in the House.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Miller, the National Endowment for the Arts. Would you, are you in favor of increasing funding or decreasing funding?
I am in favor of eliminating the National Endowment for the Arts. Look, any organization, anybody that wants to produce pornographic art or just unwholesome art or just ugly art and wants to show it and have people come and pay to see it, that's their business. I might not, it's not my thing, but that's their business. But to force you to pay for it, and you to pay for it, and you to pay for it, and me to pay for it is just dead right wrong. And I oppose it.
Mr. North?
He and I agree on that.
That concludes the questions, and the candidates now will be asked to deliver their closing remarks, which I believe are limited to 2 minutes. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, to 2 minutes, and I think Mr. North is first.
Ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate the chance to have been with you this morning. I hope you've had an opportunity to see the kinds of vision we have for the future. My challenge is still out there to anybody who would enter this contest, that what the people of Virginia deserve and what they want, from all that I've learned in my travels across the Old Dominion these past few years, is an honest and fair presentation of the vision that we would have for the future. I don't believe that there's any doubt that our principles, our values in our party represent a better future for the people of Virginia, and most importantly for the families of Virginia. I believe that what we're looking for is a whole new generation of leadership, of people who come to government for a time, not for a lifetime, of people who put principle above politics, of people who are willing to focus on the issues for the next generation, not for the next election. I believe that what we desperately need in this country are men and women of principle who
will run at every level of government, be it school boards or county boards of supervisors or city councils, mayors, the Virginia House of Delegates, and the U.S. Congress, who want to go there for a short period of time and return to live under the laws that they have made. You have my commitment to never vote for a pay raise. You have my commitment to vote for term limits at every opportunity, to encourage those who would nominate others in favor of that. You have my absolute ironclad commitment to a balanced budget amendment, a line item veto, and zero-based budgeting. You have my ironclad commitment that I will not take that pay raise if it's voted in over me. I will give it to my church. They know what to do with it better than the federal government. I would also ask you for your prayers, your pledges for this historic convention this June, and for your participation in this process. I thank you, Jim, for the chance to be on this platform with you. I thank you, the gentlemen and ladies of First Thursday, for this opportunity. God bless you all. Thank you very much.
I want to thank again the panelists for their questions. I want to say how much I appreciate all of the opportunity going with you and to respond to questions. I want to say to all of you out there, if you will come to meetings where I speak, I will answer every question you have. I will remain until the last question is answered. I will be candid with you. I think any candidate deserves or should respond to every question that a potential voter has for him or her. I would just reiterate, you know what I stand for, you know what I have done in the past, you know what I would do in the Congress of the United States. What is key is taking that seat. And this latest poll said said the results are strongest for Miller. People who are undecided because they don't know who Miller is. A candidate like Miller who is competent and not controversial is going to be a much tougher opponent for Chuck Robb than someone like Colonel North. Now let me end by telling you a story, and it's a true story, as I like to say. I don't work for the government anymore, so it's a true story. When I left OMB, one of my former associates was interviewed by the press, and here is what he said. When I started working for Jim Miller, he told me about a picture of his grandfather on his office wall. That is what I admire most. In a town of phonies and blind ambition, he makes no bones about where he came from. He is the grandson of an illiterate blacksmith, and he's never forgotten. Ladies and gentlemen, if you nominate me as your United States Senator and elect me and I go to Congress, I will not forget you. Thank you very much.
We want to thank both of these candidates for honoring us with their presence here today. I think it's been good for all of us, and we hope that all of you all will come back to First Thursday in the future. And I'm going to now turn it over to George and I'll ask that everyone rise and so he can conclude in prayer.
Yes, let's all rise in prayer. If the volunteers would please go on out to the registration table. If you haven't paid this morning, please make sure that you do so. If you'd like to help us out, we sure would appreciate it. That'll be the last I say of that. Thank you all for coming, and let's go to the Lord in prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day, for your many blessings to us. You have given us the liberty to have the system that we do, in which we can choose our own representatives. We pray that you would not allow us to tread lightly upon that liberty, that privilege which you have granted from your own hand, that you would help us in our decision making, that we would choose the man that you would have us to choose, that our hearts would be seeking your face as we make this decision. For those who are in authority over us, for our governor, our legislators, and our president, we pray that you would bless them, give them your wisdom, guide and direct all of their deliberations. We do pray for your blessings upon this entire Senate race, both the primaries and the general. We thank you for your goodness to us, and we pray that you would guide us in all our ways, that all that we say and do would glorify your name. We pray in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. We thank you, Jesus, for your goodness to us. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you all for coming.
The group First Thursday held this candidate forum Thursday in suburban Washington, D.C. for people interested in running for the United States Senate seat now held by Democratic Senator Chuck Robb. That seat is up in November. You can see this event again early tomorrow morning around 7 Eastern Time right here on C-SPAN 2. And also overnight on C-SPAN 2, coming up at around 4:55 a.m. Eastern Time, we're going to show you Thursday's